Garten of Banban 7 isn't bad. It genuinely isn't. I said on stream that it was about on par or better than Bendy and the Ink Machine, and Bendy apologist Pastra took absolutely no issue with it. Is it quite as creative or aesthetically distinct? No, but it objectively functions better and doesn't move at a snail's pace. This is the greatest improvement this series has seen in the last year, and easily has the title of Best Banban Game. Now, don't get me wrong, that was not a high bar, and I'm not going to tell you this is a good indie horror game. There is still far too much holding it back for me to be confident in calling it good. But I'm also not going to be a biased reviewer and relentlessly mock a game that clearly actually tried and succeeded in a lot of ways. I think that's how I want to start this video, actually. The Euphoric Brothers are people I have had a really hard time respecting as developers over the last year and a half. Everyone and their mothers have commented on the fact that they release games at such a fast rate that there's simply no way they are actually attempting to deliver on a significant level of quality. And I have always had that belief, especially over the last 6 months following the release of Garten of Banban 6. Garten of Banban 6 isn't the absolute worst video game I have ever played, but it is the worst game the Euphoric Brothers have developed, and I truly believe that they did not try when they made it. And you know what? Fair enough, because they don't need to try. The Garten of Banban series has made an astronomical amount of money, despite being objectively and fundamentally low quality. So why would they bother to try unless they actually wanted to? So with the release of Garten of Banban 7, that can only mean one thing. That they actually want to try and release better games going forward. The Euphoric Brothers, with Banban 7 alone, have showcased growth as developers, a desire to grow as developers, the ability to make amends with people they've been on bad terms with, and the ability to legitimately move on from former mistakes. And again, I am unbiased, despite what some people on the internet may believe about me, so I have to say, I legitimately respect that. This game still has quite a few major flaws that irritate the hell out of me, but it really isn't a bad game at all. Starting with the visual side of things, the environmental work in this game is a huge step up from the rest of the series. Granted, the assets are still purchased and unoriginal, but what people that blindly hate on these games don't care to realize is that that is very common in game development across the board. The problem with the Banban games having unoriginal assets was never that they were unoriginal assets, it was that the developers didn't bother to think about the use of those assets. A comparison I made when the first Banban game came out a year and a half ago is that environmentally and aesthetically, it is kind of like Yandere Simulator. They're not visually similar by any means, but the thing with Yandere Simulator is that it does not have a consistent aesthetic. It is just a bunch of different objects thrown together with no thought of how they would actually look when put together. Like, literally at the start of the game, the first thing you see, the distant background with the trees, the pink trees, and the characters do not look like they should be in the same game. That's basically what Banban was for a long time. Banban 4 and 6 to some extent attempted to fix that problem. Both games are closer to having a cohesive aesthetic, but generally, Banban has always been just a bunch of objects slammed together, making a game that doesn't look like it's really trying at all. But again, Banban 7 is the first game in this series that really looks like it tried. The town that essentially acts as the main area that you use to navigate from sequence to sequence is genuinely really nice. It has a solid and coherent aesthetic, again fixing a problem that Banban has had forever. And I love the way the weird Javanium alien creatures roam around the environment. This place actually feels lived in, which is a pretty impressive feeling to pull off. The bar feels cozy and realistic, the theater is charming, the hospital area from the start feels like a decrepit yet functional institution. The upgrade in environmental work and visual quality, despite still not actually making the assets, at the very least showcases an understanding of the flaws of the previous games. The story, shockingly, is also the most fun it has ever been to follow, and that is entirely because the game is simply made better. Something that people argue with me about constantly is that I'm too critical of something that is intentionally silly. This is an argument I have all the time with parody games. To be fair, it is more difficult to critically analyze a piece of work that is intentionally bad in order to prove a point or share a message. But my argument will always be that if a developer is charging players for a game, it should still be an enjoyable experience. A game like Potato Thriller, despite being kind of funny, is still terrible in my opinion because it's beyond awful to play, regardless of the fact that it's made as a parody. But a game like Toings Pops, which I cannot recommend enough, is both hilarious and fundamentally well made, so it's worth playing. Taking this back to Banban, the Garten of Banban games, after the first and second, clearly incorporated a goofier tone on purpose. Although they are still horror games, you cannot argue with me on that, when the Banban game with the most jokes starts its description with "Embrace the horrors," they wanted to make some jokes and have a playful vibe. However, they were still simply bad games. They looked bad, and they played badly, and they were poorly made. There is really no excuse for that. But now that this game isn't unbearable to play, the story and its jokes are actually a lot more charming. Syringian is actually a decent character with pretty good voice acting, despite how terrible the name is. The dynamic between Sheriff Toadster and Bittergiggle in their scene is surprisingly cute. The citizens are fun additions to the world. Well, except for one of them, this son of a bitch right here. Nah, I am just /Jing. This character here is voiced by Yeah, and I feel the need to talk about that because that is pretty significant and almost feels like an ending to this chapter of the Banban story. First of all, this was very funny. Despite the fact that I talked to Yeah damn near every day, he actually abided by his NDA and didn't tell anyone that he was in this game. So, that was a genuinely fun surprise, one that I took no issue with whatsoever. But more importantly, it goes without saying how crazy this is to happen. The beef between the Euphoric brothers and Yeah was the Kendrick vs. Drake of 2023, except thankfully no pedophilia accusations were made. There was a whole jokey movement about getting the Euphoric brothers to unblock Yeah on Twitter. Then they blocked basically all of us and called out Yeah alongside some other streamers. Then we did a whole charity event to turn the devs' shenanigans into something more positive. Then Yeah was banned from the Banban Roblox game, following a unanimous vote from the developers. Then despite all of that, the Euphoric brothers incorporated a meme in the community that Yeah made into one of their games. The Euphoric brothers and Yeah making amends and doing this together despite everything that has happened is legitimately such a satisfying conclusion to this tumultuous journey. The Euphoric brothers have reached a point where they are not opposed to simply laughing at the past and moving on from it, and that is really nice to see. Even the posters in the theater are signs of growth, and they are also genuinely funny. They acknowledged the merch button in an actually funny way. This doesn't read like a passive-aggressive bitch baby acknowledgement like most of their behavior on social media from a year ago. This reads like they are actually laughing at themselves and acknowledging how stupid this was. There's also a FNAF reference and a Poppy Playtime reference. There's even a Zumbo Sauce reference, and I will always say that this shit is fucking funny. To sum up everything I've rambled on about for the last while, Garten of Banban 7 is an important stepping stone. The Euphoric brothers managed to thoroughly alter their image using this game, in my opinion. They've shown more growth here than ever before, and they have absolutely earned my respect as long as they continue to keep this up. With all that being said, with all that niceness that I've given, I did say I still don't consider this a good game, because although the Euphoric brothers fixed so many consistent problems and made a game that is generally alright to play through, there are still enough issues to make the game frustrating. As is tradition, I simply have no choice but to talk about the drone. The drone is what I was most looking forward to seeing in the game, because I saw in the trailers that they were changing its mechanics. Instead of clicking on something and the drone tragically going in that direction, you would actually look through the drone and control it yourself. This is something parody games have done decently. It was such an obvious change to make, and the blueprint on how to do it was completely handed to them. Yet it is, dare I say, just as bad as the original drone. There are two major issues with this new drone mechanically. For one, once you start moving the drone around, it is basically impossible to stop it from moving. There is no way to cut off its momentum, and it is really, really hard to slow it down. This makes navigating it a total bitch. But the significantly bigger problem is that the drone is seemingly programmed to reset to its starting position if the game believes it is currently stuck. But the game has absolutely no idea when that actually applies. It is way too common for the drone to simply hit a wall or something in the environment and then immediately shoot backwards to its spawn point. And sometimes the drone doesn't even seem to know where its starting point was, because occasionally, instead of going back to its starting point, it will go somewhere completely different, sometimes literally clipping through the floor into a different room. I have been begging for the drone to be changed for so long, and the blueprint for how to change it was literally right there. It was so easy, and somehow they managed to fuck that up. This game is also still simply boring and slow a lot of the time. Syringian, despite being a surprisingly decent character, talks way too much. A lot of what he says isn't really important, and you start to just disassociate as he goes on and on. At the very start of the game, there's an instructional video for employees that explains a mechanic that is used directly after the video, but that is the only time it is used, and it lasts a really long time. This video is barely significant. It teaches you so little that you don't even really have to remember what it says. Yet it goes on and on, it's unskippable, and it isn't particularly funny or entertaining. The theater feels like it has quite a bit of filler, as the citizen in there, voiced by Fusion Z Gamer, talks an unreasonable amount, but the more annoying part is that you have to sit there and watch a play. But this play isn't really entertaining enough to warrant being a mandatory part of the game, and the entire thing is to lead into a short chase sequence with the two birds of the franchise, but it is incredibly pointless and underwhelming. The dialogue, writing, and puzzles in this game are all a step up from the previous entries in the series, but it still gets dull at multiple points. Another part of the game's design that makes it dull and boring is how dark it is at random times. The lighting in this game is very strange. Sometimes the more lit up areas and character details are piercingly bright, but more noticeably, some environments are frustratingly dark for no reason. A lot of indie horror developers will make their games really dark at certain points, usually to make up for the fact that they are simply not very good at structuring horror. But what they need to learn is that this doesn't fix that problem. It merely makes the game way more annoying to play. Don't get me wrong, a darker environment than a fucking Kirby game is generally better than the alternative when making a horror game. However, having nothing but the lights off is just inconvenient for the player when they're trying to navigate a location. I also feel the need to mention that there are a couple parts of this game that are so identical to other games that it's hard to give it a pass. Garten of Banban, at its very inception, earned a reputation for being an unoriginal knockoff, and some of this game was just a really strange move given that reputation. This memory puzzle does the exact same thing that the memory puzzle in Poppy Playtime Chapter 2 does. It's a regular memory game until the final sequence is completely impossible and guarantees you fail. The way it bugs out is egregiously similar. And immediately after that, a blobby monster that cries like a baby breaks in. This is just the Resident Evil 8 baby. This one, you could argue, is more of a reference or more of an inspiration, but it's still just too similar in my opinion. And lastly, this game is a Garten of Banban game. Yes, that is a critique I have, but not in the way that you would think, bear with me. I think the best thing the Euphoric Brothers can do for themselves, for their games, and for their audience is simply take a solid month or two to relearn the core fundamental elements of programming. What I mean by this can be perfectly explained using the Bitter Giggle chase sequence. This sequence is a great example of legitimate improvement from the developers. The chase is actually woven into the environment in an interesting way, the chase succeeds at building a level of tension, it has a distinct and well-executed beginning and end. However, as we have known for well over a year, the movement in Banban feels terrible. This sequence is almost just straight up good, but the jumping and platforming in Banban feels overly floaty and overly stiff. If the Euphoric Brothers just took some time to adjust and change the physics and mobility of the protagonist, this would be a good sequence. There are some other obvious flaws that again would be corrected by just taking the time to work on the basics of programming. Bitter Giggle can be seen clipping through walls, and his hitbox is a little unreasonable. Those three problems have been so prominent throughout this series' lifetime, and the developers have simply never taken the time to work on them. A problem with every Banban game is simply that they are built poorly, and that has yet to change. It has gotten better with time, but the Banban games are still functionally subpar, and that makes even the better ones annoying to experience. The Euphoric Brothers have seemingly reached a point where they are able to come up with good sequences. They have some solid ideas in Banban 7, and more often than ever before, they're executed relatively well. But the main problem with the game now is no longer boring sequences or unoriginal sequences, it's the game fundamentally feels bad to play. And the Euphoric Brothers have done nothing to change that after 6 games. However, they have taken the time to learn how to make better sequences. So if they can keep up the good work that they've done here with the content of the game, and make the game itself functionally better, they have a legitimate opportunity to make a game that is simply good overall. Garten of Banban 8 is now on the way. As for Banban 5, myself and are now just convinced it will be the last game in the series. It will probably be a weird prequel game to tie things up, and will likely just sit unreleased for a very long time. It's entirely possible that Garten of Banban 8 will completely fail to continue the trajectory that 7 put in motion. This game being passable could have been a fluke. But based on everything that came with this release, I actually have some faith that the developers have enough of a desire to keep this up that they will manage to do so. Garten of Banban 7 really isn't all that good. It's janky to play and can get boring and has some pretty terrible mechanics in it. But with that being said, this game isn't all that bad either. I think it's imperfect mechanically, but it's okay to play through, it's aesthetically pleasing, the story and humor are an improvement. That is so much more than I would have expected after the last game, and the ones before it. But it managed to pull all that off. With that being said, all we can do is hope that the future of Banban will be on an upwards trajectory, and regardless, as it stands, the Euphoric Brothers have definitely earned some credit and some respect.